Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. This is Starfleet Tactical. I am Chris Weave, as always. And with me, I once again don't have Pat Doyle or Alyssa. I have Alec. So, Alec, thank you for joining me.
Your booby prize.
It's always good when you can join us. It's especially good when so I was working on what the presentation I was going to do today, which I'll talk a little bit about, but I'm not going to do it today. And I sort of kind of ran out of steam a little bit. My stamina is still not up to normal. And I had a little bit of a indigestion or something, which is so the day of all the excitement, it started with me having like an upset stomach.
Oh.
And then 2 hours later, I was like in the process of bleeding out. So I have a little bit of an upset stomach, and I go, that's interesting. I remember what happened the last time, but in this time it was just an upset stomach. So
well, that's good. Yeah, that's like I got my first kidney stone this year.
Ooh.
A few months ago, and I didn't know what I thought. I was my back, and then it wasn't, and then the pain got added. So now it's kind of like when I've had my back problems. In 2011, I had my back went out, and it was a slow, gradual decline into immobility. And I even went to San Diego Comic-Con like crippled. I was walking around, everyone was like, "Are you okay?" So the next year, I started the same kind of pathology started happening, and I was like, "Uh-oh," and my trainer was like, because the year before I had to finally get a cortisone shot, and that's what cured it. But my trainer was like, "Have you ever done acupuncture?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Look, I've got this guy. He's amazing. You got to." And yeah, I went to him, and in 2 weeks, boom, I was 100%.
Oh, Alec, if you can hear me, you just froze.
And
you froze there for a moment.
So with the now I'm learning. So now I've got to have that same kind of process for a kidney stone, because there's two other. So the CAT scan showed two other stones in there that just aren't big, but they'll cripple me if I don't if I'm not careful.
Oh yeah.
So I keep my Norco, my painkiller, with me. There's some in the car or some in my travel kit, and it's always within reach. So if I feel that pain again, take that painkiller right away, and just be prepared. And I was fortunate this year that the kidney stone, I mean, it was 4:00 in the morning, or maybe it was 5. I went to the hospital at 7. They drug me up, they CAT scanned me, they released me, and I passed the stone that afternoon. So I was lucky.
That is lucky. For me, they had to go in.
Oh, did they?
And
did they have to zap it up?
A laser to break it into pieces.
Oh, they used a laser, because they'll also do ultrasound.
No, this was a laser. They used a laser.
Wow.
To break it into pieces, and then I got to pass the pieces.
Holy shit!
I mean, that went on for like 6 weeks. And for those of you out there, well, I promise we're going to talk about space combat and Star Trek and all sorts of other cool stuff. But for those of you out there who've never had a kidney stone, it's amazing how quickly you can go from being perfectly fine to debilitating, crippling pain and nausea. It takes like 5 minutes. You can go from like, I feel perfectly fine, to I just hope it's fatal soon. Right. So yeah, I got to try Dilaudid because the fentanyl wasn't good enough. So they threw some Dilaudid on top of it.
Oh my gosh.
And they found the kidney stone, and eventually they had to go in and get it. Which, the timing was horrible because I am a bladder cancer survivor, which is, if you got to pick a cancer to have, non-invasive, low-level bladder cancer is the one to pick.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, they just went in and scraped it off, but it did mean that so I had that done in 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, October of 2019. And then I had to get scoped every 3 months for a year, and then every 6 months for a year. And now it's up to every year. So that scoping procedure is nowhere near as bad as you would think. But as I said to the nurse who pointed that out to me the first time, it could be 1/10 as bad as I think and still be really bad. It's really not that bad though, as these things go. It's nowhere near as bad as you might think. But in any event, I had just been to my urologist like 3 weeks previous before the kidney stone happened, and so it's like. So I did ask him. I said, "Does this count? Can I reset the clock from here?" Since you were just in there looking around, and he said, yeah, reset the clock. So,
oh yeah.
So it looked like for a while there, I was going to do them like, instead of doing them every 3 months, I was going to do them every month and a half.
Oh God. I know. And everyone out there, TJ says gallstones are like that. Yeah. I also have a gallstone they found so I have to go see a specialist and I don't know what they're going to do about that. Yeah, I know. So this is so those of you who tuned in for Starfleet Tactical, sorry that you had to join the Waldorf and Astor old man club.
So for what it's worth, I mean, I'm willing to sort of like talk about all my medical stuff in public. You know, I'm going to put it up on YouTube. I'm willing to do all that stuff because the lesson, I'll take all the subtlety out of it. The lesson is, if there's something going wrong, you should go see your doctor because they can do amazing stuff, including saving your life, right? So, I mean, go see your doctor. Go see your doctor. If you're having an issue, go see your doctor.
Absolutely.
And so, like, you know, my doctors have saved my life a couple of times now, and you know, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So right now I'm doing pretty well. I did some blood work last week, and I'm now back to I went from being chronically anemic to acutely anemic, and now I'm back to being chronically anemic. I'm pretty much where I was 2 hours before the excitement started.
Oh God.
So that's the good news. The bad news is I'm where I was 2 hours before the excitement started because I wasn't an all up round at that point. I had an appointment to see a hematologist later that week so that we could figure out why I'm anemic. Now, we've pretty much answered the question about why I'm anemic. And the answer is because I'm a gastric bypass patient, and being anemic is a Mark 1 Mod 0 side effect of that. For all of you who are being outraged at the fact that I'm having a side effect, because my friends will say, like, did they tell you that this was a possibility? And it's like, first of all, yes, they did. They told me about a long list of stuff, and especially nutrition-related things, because you're playing with your nutritional system. You know, that bypass part of gastric bypass, part of what they bypassed is the part of your small intestine that's really good at sucking nutrients out of food.
Oh, wow.
And so there's basically a couple of parts of your small intestine at the very beginning and the very end where it's really good about sucking nutrients out of food. And one of mine is effectively no longer part of the system. So this is normal. And the second thing I say to people is, if they had told me I'm probably going to end up getting iron infusions twice a year, once or twice a year, that's probably what it's going to end up being. If they had said that I was going to have to do it once or twice a month, I would have said, okay, let's do this, because this surgery, wait for it, saved my life. This is one of those instances where I think that doctors saved my life, because I was in a situation where you end up with positive feedback loops. Positive feedback loops are a bitch, right? Positive feedback loops suck. All my health problems were making my health problems worse.
Wow.
And so I had to break the cycle. And so I did that. So TJ points out that he got me steak for dinner when I had dinner over at his house a couple of weeks ago. He did get me steak for dinner. Unfortunately, my body's not very good about pulling iron out of stuff. The human body's not good about pulling iron out of food anyway, right? And so, yeah. I mean, it's like if you eat spinach, you only get like 2% of the iron in it.
Yeah, which is part of the reason for juicing, is because
Yeah,
juicing unlocks the nutrients in vegetables and fruits. It separates it from the fiber. The fiber is which is good. The fiber is good, but it also locks the nutrients in, and so juicing is allows you to retain more of the nutrients.
yeah.
Learned that 30 years ago. So anyway, what are we going to talk about tonight that's not about us being old men?
Well, so I figured that we would just sort of talk about a few things. I won't say at random, but sort of semi at random. So, first of all, there's one thing that I've had on my list of things to come back and mention since the week after the time when Pat and I talked about Strange New Worlds. So, that was literally before I went into the hospital. I went into the hospital in July 25th. So, I think it was the July 17th show, or it was the one, it was the July 17th show, because I sat with my brother and we watched like 5 episodes of Strange New Worlds. And then from my brother's house, we talked about those 5 episodes and the combat stuff in it. All the while my brother was exposing me to COVID because he tested positive on that Tuesday of that week. And then I got sick the following week. So I never got a chance to say the following. I had made the thing about how it was sort of stupid to say, to evacuate the lower decks of the Enterprise, because they, in the one episode where they were down in the gas giant planet and they thought they might get crushed. And so, like, does that make any sense whatsoever? That doesn't make any sense to me that you would do that, because the pressure differential wasn't going to be that great. The entire ship was going to go up. Andy Presby, my friend Andy, who I am going to have on the show at some point, Andy convinced me I'm wrong about that.
Really?
Well, he convinced me I might be wrong. And so he convinced me enough that I'm willing to press the I believe button. What he said was, if you go through and you read with what Sternbach and Okuda said about how the Enterprise is constructed, and you read between the lines a few things, and there's a couple of other sort of semi-canon sources where Sternbach has talked about it. And if you apply that back in time 100 years, his argument is that the saucer section of the Enterprise is mostly small spaces. And he argues that basically those hallways are pressure tight, that there's actually a lot of pressure doors in there, that they're actually intended to be pressure tight.
Right.
Now, I'll note, for the record, like, that's not how it usually works on ships. If you get like U.S. Navy ships, on a surface ship, that's how it works below a certain part of the waterline. But you still have compartments. You still have doors that are not intended to hold pressure at all. They're access control. In fact, sometimes in certain places, and they're damage control, sometimes you'll see both. Like if you go into combat on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer, there are 2 doors, like one right on top of the other. One of those doors is a big armored heavy metal door with the dogs, and it's got the gears and you have to turn it. And it's, you close that when you go to battle stations, and it is an armored door that seals off combat from the rest of the ship. And it's got one of those on each side. The other door is just like a standard, like, particle board door, or maybe it's metal. I can't remember. Probably varies by ship because there's so much difference between the different shipyards. It's just a regular door, and it's got like a swipe lock on it. And so the big heavy door, which is a pain in the ass to move, and they only close it during battle stations, that's about damage control. That door inside of it, that's literally inside the door frame, that one is about access control. That's what keeps the riffraff out. And so it's the same for a lot of things like that. You see that in a lot of different places on a ship. On a submarine, you would think you're underwater, right? A lot of pressure tight compartments. On a Los Angeles class submarine, there are 3 pressure tight compartments. There is the reactor compartment, there's forward of the reactor compartment, and there's aft of the reactor compartment. So if they if you poke a hole in the forward compartment of Los Angeles class, over a third of the ship floods.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, it's going to the bottom.
Is that
the guys
because?
might
Yeah.
live, but they're not in a submarine that can surface at that point.
Right. Is that because it would just take too many other pressure tight doors to make the damage any less?
Yeah,
Like,
so it's a weight thing. The thing about
that's true, right? Yeah.
the thing about surface ships are, I need to add an extra 100 tons, no big deal. Let's just add an extra 100 tons. It'll just be a quarter inch lower in the water, no big deal.
Right.
Submarines, a lot tighter tolerances.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
The previous class, the Permit class, aka the Thresher class, that class had 5 watertight compartments. But at some point, if you read Norman Friedman's Illustrated Design History, a U.S. submarine since 1945 in Illustrated Design History, he talks about how they just basically made the they made the decision that, like, look, our best defense is not to get hit by a torpedo, and so we're probably better off spending that weight allotment on something that will help us not get hit by a
torpedo. That's interesting.
And so in their case, in the case of the Los Angeles class, it's got a huge engine room. So that's the Los Angeles are rumored to be a lot faster than the previous classes. In fact, a lot of the and they thinned the hull as a result because they thought they were going to have newer, better steel available, but one of the problems you run into with all of these things is that you make the decision that you're going to build something. Well, it's not like you can just go to the store and pull stuff off the shelf, right? You've got to develop a whole bunch of technologies together. And one of them was, they go to the people who make the submarine steel, and they say, hey, where are you with HY100? We're using HY80. Where are you with HY100? And it's, can you have it done by this time? And for whatever reason, the answer turned out to be no. And I have no idea. I mean, I'm not slamming anybody in that. I don't know why that was the case, but I know that their planning factor was they were going to go from HY80 to HY100. And hey, that means we can make the hull thinner, but still maintain the same depth capability. Yeah, they ended up building it with HY80, which means they didn't maintain the same depth capability.
Oh, wow.
Now everything I told you was in Norman Friedman, and I should emphasize, because I haven't actually said it yet, I do not speak for any employer, past, present, or future.
Which is down there at the bottom.
Yeah.
So why did the Russians make the Alphas out of titanium?
That's a very good question. And there are different schools of thought on that. And I will admit that I've never gone, I used to work in the intelligence community. I could have probably gone to the back files, which may or may not have been computerized, and did a good hard yank and tried to figure out whether we ever came to an official conclusion as to why they did it. And of course, if I had done that, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't tell you what that said, probably. But so here's my unclassified opinion that I had before I became a member of the intelligence community. I had done, still done some anti-submarine warfare work before that, but this is just my guess on this. If you build it out of titanium, you can probably do a better job of taking a torpedo. I mean, it gives you some increased depth capability. That's great. Increased depth is fine. It gives you also the ability to it makes you more likely to survive a near miss. A stronger hull is just good across the board. And with titanium, you could basically get a lot more strength than you could with a steel hull of you could get the equivalent strength or more for a lot less weight. Now, the other properties of titanium are not the same. Titanium is not as rigid as steel. It has a tendency to deform more, but that's typical metallurgy. You need to compensate for that, right? Titanium is really, really seriously cool, but they moved away from titanium. because I think that in the end they concluded, boy, titanium's really expensive. Because it is. It's insanely expensive.
Right.
It's hard to work with. I mean, it's not expensive because it's rare, because it's not. Titanium is like it's like the 5th or 6th most common element in the Earth's crust. Maybe
Really?
yeah, or maybe it's like the 5th or 6th most common metal. It's not rare, relatively speaking. Oh, Rob Davidoff points out that titanium's also obnoxiously crack prone. That doesn't surprise me. I think I've heard that elsewhere. And I will note that Rob is not speaking for his employer, but his employer knows a lot about metals, and Rob knows a lot about metals. So if he wants to say what he does for a living, I'll let him. I'll pass it on, but I'm going to wait and see if he says it. So it's not that rare. It's just it's really hard to work with, and you got to do things like when they built the SR-71, they had to have entirely special tools to work with it,
Right.
and a special filtering system, because chlorine reacts to it and nickel reacts to it. I think it's nickel. So you can't use like normal nickel plated steel. So all the they had to basically have separate tools just for working on the SR-71. So,
Wow.
but so getting back to Strange New World and that below deck things,
Right.
Andy points out that like you're in the primary hull, you've got small spaces, they look like they're well framed. He thinks that basically those are all intended to be pressure tight, because he's of the opinion, I'm not as convinced that this is there, because I think that everybody who thinks about this thinks about buildings, but he thinks that there might be some places where there's some big equipment in that primary hull that that you would need to have, the people parts be pressurized, because these other parts, you wouldn't want them to be part of the same pressure system, right? Because they might have noxious chemicals or something in it. So you've got a lot of reason why you want to make all that stuff pressure tight, why you want to make it airtight. Secondary hull, on the other hand, big open spaces.
Right. You've got the shuttle bay, you've got engineering, you've got whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That
circular.
storage spaces, a lot of storage spaces. Yeah. Well, I think the whole, just going by what people postulated about TOS and what we saw in Next Generation, really the primary hull is meant to be somewhat of a lifeboat.
Yeah.
Right. So, and also, and I would agree. Listen, when we were designing the interior of the Ares, if you look at some of the concept art, you'll see, which I don't think I have on this computer, but you'll see we have a lot of archways with pressure doors.
Yeah.
Because that is, you have got, that's just what we were thinking. We were thinking there's got to be a lot of, you're going to combat. You have to make the assumption that your hull is going to get punctured.
Yeah.
And with that assumption, then the question is, once you get past the, how do we prevent that from happening? Shields, whatever, double hull, or whatever you're doing. The second is, well, how do we handle damage control? How do we minimize that damage on, and getting back to what you said before, we don't have to worry about weight.
Yep.
Right. It's like, fine. It's, which is, I don't know if it was you and I were having that discussion, but the discussion was, well, I guess really size doesn't matter, or, the conversation that I was having, I forgot if it was with you, was when Discovery first came out. I was like, what is up with that bridge? You could play football on that bridge. It's so big. Whatever happened to economy of space, right? And someone made this comment, well, it doesn't really matter how big it is, does it? Because whether it's, 300 meters or 1,000 meters, it's not going to take much more or less to get it to subspace.
So yeah, I mean, I'll give them some credit for that. The problem though is, if you're trying to communicate with other people in the bridge, having to yell across a basketball court to the other
I
side.
agree. I still think it's stupid. One of many things I hated about Discovery, and
Yeah.
and it was really, you know, I can label almost everything I didn't like about Discovery as production design. Whether
Yeah.
it was Klingons, Klingon ships, Klingon makeup, Klingon costumes, the bridge, the uniforms. I hated the production design of Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
Whereas Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I give them credit for their production design.
I do think the bridge is too big there too, because they made it bigger. And the main problem, I had this problem with both of those bridges, and I think maybe the Shenzhou had this problem as well. I can't remember that as well. But every place you look, doesn't matter. Wherever you look, you're staring directly into a light. I mean, just think about, I've got my computer in that space trying to work on my computer.
I
It's
agree.
yeah,
I agree. What
and
looks good for the film is not necessarily what things should be. Yeah, in combat, in combat. All right.
yeah, in fact, like in the Combat Information Center, I spent a lot of time in the anti-submarine warfare module of the Combat Information Center on Nimitz class aircraft carriers. A little bit of time in surface, which is right next door. But I mean, they've got these lights, and the lights are maybe like this big, overhead lights, and they've got a couple of fluorescent bulbs in them, and then they also have those sort of those grates in them, so that you never are looking. You have to stand directly underneath one to actually see the bulb.
Right.
And those lights are actually pretty cool, because those lights have 3 settings. The settings are red, white, and blue.
Oh wow.
And so you never use red in, well, I guess you could. We usually used blue in that space, or white. One of the reasons why that space is separate, like the ASW guys have a tendency to, for whatever reason, to have a different lighting standard than the guys in the other room. And I never did quite figure that out. I think it has to do with there's less scope watching in the room where I was, and more like being clustered around a chart that's on a table. Whereas in the other room, there's lots of blue light, and they're looking at the big screens. And then you have red and white lights whenever you go into a berthing area. And so they, at nighttime, they'll turn on the red lights, and they've got red lights in the hallways too. And if the red lights are on in the passageways, it means be quiet. It's either because you're in a berthing area and you don't want to, wake people, or it's because you're doing anti-submarine warfare and you're trying to be quiet.
So, interesting.
Yeah, I really, really liked NX-01. I liked everything about that ship as a general rule.
Yeah, I was pretty much I was pretty much a fan as well. I thought it looked good. It made sense to me. It made sense that it was in that lineage. Which gets back to the other, if I talk about the 2 things I have a problem with Discovery, the first one is production design. The second one is, don't tell me it's in the Prime universe. Just tell me the Kurtzman universe is a separate universe. Fine, we're good. Let's go.
Now I did.
It's like the Kelvin universe. It's like it's a separate universe. Fine, it's not the same Kirk, different life. Let's go. So. I think Kurtzman and company made a huge mistake by trying to tell us that was in the Prime universe. Tell us it's a different universe, and we are mature sci-fi fans. We get it. You already proved it worked with JJ. Just do the same thing, and we're good to go. But now you're trying to tell me that those ships and these ships, it's fuck.
Totally agree. The one thing I will give them credit for, so a friend of mine is the president of the Klingon Language Institute.
Oh, okay. Who's that?
His name's Lawrence Schoen.
Okay. I've dealt with a couple of Klingon guys who worked with us on Prelude.
Yeah, Lawrence is the guy who I had a conversation with J.G. Hertzler when remember I had that long conversation with J.G. at SphinxCon.
Yeah.
I started it off by saying, because I had been in a con like 2 weeks previously, and I started it off by saying, hey, the other day I was talking with Lawrence about the great job you did on his novels, because he did the audiobooks for him. Barsk and Moons of Barsk. They're both fantastic, and I hope he gets to publish the third book in that series at some point. And so that was like J.G. Hertzler and I talked for a solid half hour, and neither one of us mentioned Star Trek. And but Lawrence, I sent a note to Lawrence and said, "Hey, have you seen this?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "How's the Klingon?" And he said, "The Klingon is perfect. They went and they figured it out, and he basically said everything that they did in terms of Klingon is pitch perfect."
Oh, well, that's good to know.
So okay. they were apparently were anal retentive about that, which proves that they can be anal retentive if they wanted to be, and they just weren't.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think this is the challenge with, and again, it obviously was not important to them, but I think the challenge with the new Star Trek, with Kurtzman Trek, and I am not a Kurtzman basher. People should know by now that I have, despite my reservations on Discovery, I love Picard, I love Lower Decks, I enjoy Prodigy. I've not seen Strange New Worlds yet. I still have not binged it. I am going to. Yeah, I finally told Crystal today. I said, no, I'm not going to watch the new Lord of the Rings TV. I can't even get through what I'm trying to get through. That is not it, because she keeps finding new shows for us to watch, and I'm just like, can I get through? I still haven't seen the final episode of For All Mankind for this season. But that being said, I really, the challenge with Star Trek, especially when they're doing all these shows, which they haven't gotten their hands around, and I would say, and this may be a CBS problem, it may be a Kurtzman secret headquarters problem, is they don't have that one person who's sitting above it all, figuring out and saying, okay, it's all right, it's going to be an alternate universe, or no, it's not going to be an alternate universe. Okay, we're going to convince the fans that this fits into the original Star Trek, whatever, and then making sure everything is consistent. All right, because you came up with a new Enterprise in Discovery, and then in the first season of Picard, you brought that new Enterprise into the first season of Picard. Well, we know in Star Trek The Next Generation, we saw Constitution-class ships on the screens. We know that is in line with the original series. Now, basically, Picard kind of, for me, solidified that it's an alternate universe. Yeah. An alternate universe where that was where where Discovery happened, because Discovery didn't happen in TOS. So I don't think they have that one person who's sitting on top of it, which is a Kevin Feige, or it is a I'm not sure it's not Kathy Kennedy for Star Wars. It's kind of more Dave Filoni and Dave
Filoni.
Who was there for Clone Wars and Rebels and all that. But they've got that guy who's making sure everything is consistent, right? Unfortunately, and let me just for the perfect example is the production designer for Discovery said, I don't want round nacelles. Whoa, that is not your decision. Production designer, shut the fuck up. That's not your decision, because that's the decision that should have been made of the person that unfortunately Kurtzman never had. Listen, Kurtzman is a brilliant TV producer. And I said after the second season of Discovery, you watch, Pike's going to get a show and it's going to be awesome. And that's exactly what happened. All credit to Kurtzman for that. They listened to fans. They wanted episodic, not serialized. They took out all and they changed, and it was great. So you got Lower Decks, so you got Prodigy, so you got Pike. It's all good. However, they don't have that person. Kurtzman's a TV person. He's not a Star Trek person. They don't have that Star Trek person. They don't have the Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige was working on all those shitty Marvel movies in the '90s, The Punisher and Daredevil and Nick Fury and all that shit. They don't have that person in Star Trek. So when the production designer said no round nacelles, they should have. That's a decision that should have been made by the Star Trek czar, and the Star Trek czar would turn to Kurtzman and say, is this an alternate universe, or are you trying to be in the prime timeline? Because if you're going to be in the prime timeline, you need round nacelles. If you don't want round nacelles, let's just say if you want the Klingons to look like that, let's just say it's an alternate universe, and you can do whatever the hell you want. Screw canon, right? And let's face it, that's what Robert Orci told J to do for the Kelvin movies. They did it, and fans were like, okay. Right? It wasn't a problem. So all those issues were because they don't have that czar. They don't have the Star Trek czar that's sitting over it, making sure those decisions are in line, because those decisions aren't Kurtzman decisions. Kurtzman's like charting the course of the shows and multiple shows, and he needs that Star Trek guy under him who's kind of making everything internally consistent.
Yeah,
I get off my soapbox.
I think there's
I'm sorry. I clicked it. Yes, that's exactly right, Stephen. Kudos to you.
So TJ also had a good comment about Lower Decks. Is trying to tell a story about how Starfleet has these recurring issues about how they take care of their people, but they keep forgetting that, and they keep not doing that. It wouldn't be Star Trek if it didn't take them a while to sort of figure out what the show was about.
Yeah.
I mean, Deep Space Nine, I think, did the best job in that it only took them about 6 episodes or 4 episodes before they were like getting solid triples every week. Whereas, a lot of the other shows took a lot longer than that. Yeah. Arguably Voyager took about 4 seasons.
Voyager. Yeah.
Maybe more.
Yeah. Well, listen, there's and every show, the first 2 seasons of every show have it's been a microcosm of that problem. Even if it's not that the first 2 seasons are bad, so Next Generation, the first 2 seasons suck, right? It's bad 80s sci-fi. It's almost unwatchable these days. The first
it was pretty unwatchable then.
Yeah, that's true. The first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine are not bad.
No, they're
not unwatchable by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
I think it's kind of what you're saying.
I think one of the best episodes the show produced was in the first half of the first season, and it was the episode where the Cardassian is pretending to be the war criminal.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that was just fantastic episode.
Duet? I think that was Duet.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called.
With what's his name? With that wonderful actor, Harold Ulam, I think is his name. Wonderful, right? That's a brilliant episode.
Yeah,
brilliant episode, right? And that is in the first season. But there were some clunkers, like the game, the one where they're trapped in the game and stuff. There were some clunkers, but but third season, it's just it's Worf arrives and they're off to the races, and Cisco, but and all of a sudden we get Captain Hawk instead of they're not trying to whitewash Cisco anymore. They let him be the who he wants to be, and that show really takes off. But it's the same with Enterprise. Like, the problems with the first 2 seasons of Enterprise are not that they're bad. And I can make that argument of Voyager. It's not that it's bad. It's that the show's trying to find its footing, right? And I think if we kind of look at all these Star Treks and say it takes a Star Trek show a couple seasons to get its footing, Then you look at Discovery and you can say, well, for Kurtzman, yep, first 2 seasons are kind of they're trying to find their footing, and it ain't, it's not great Star Trek. What's season 3? What's Kurtzman's season 3 is Picard. Season 1 of Picard is the third season that Kurtzman produced.
I'm less enamored with Picard than you are.
And that's fine. That's fine. It's not great Star Trek. I don't think either of the seasons of Picard are great Star Trek. I think from everything people are telling me, Strange New Worlds is great Star Trek. I'd argue Lower Decks is great Star Trek.
Strange New Worlds. I've seen like 5 or 6 episodes. There was one I thought that was kind of a standout. When you get to the one where it's not a space whale, but space whale is a good way to describe it. When you get to the episode with the space whales, that's the one that I thought was the best. There's an episode where you've got a young Jim Kirk, who I think Anson Mount does a better Jim Kirk than the actor they had doing Jim Kirk. In fact, there's a few times where, especially with short sentences, where like he only says one sentence, that's it. Where when I close my eyes, I hear movie era Shatner.
Oh.
In terms of how he phrases stuff, and I also like the fact that every now and then Pike will say something like, "All right, I don't have any ideas. Anybody got anything?" That's a good one. We're going to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that. I mean, it's a pretty good show. It's a pretty good show. I don't think it's the be all and end all. I'll still take Next Gen any day of the week. Although this is a show that does have a little bit more of a sense of humor. One of the things I've said about Next Gen is Next Gen does not have a sense of humor.
No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not.
And it works without the sense of humor, which is sort of interesting given that the sense of humor was such a big deal in the original series. In fact,
well, listen, culture comes from the top.
Yeah.
Picard doesn't have a sense of humor.
He really doesn't. And I've often said that I think that the original series was at its best when it was doing light comedy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like A Piece of the Action is my favorite original series episode.
A Piece of the Action is outright brilliant, as is Trouble with Tribbles, right? They, those are both comedy-laden show episodes, and they are both freaking brilliant.
Yeah, and the thing I really love about A Piece of the Action is it's clear that Kirk is like right in the zone, right? He knows how to handle these guys. He's right in the zone, and he is running full tilt, and the entire rest of his crew is trying to keep up. Right. And they're doing an okay job of keeping up.
Right.
But they're really having to work at it.
Yeah.
Whereas Kirk just sort of goes, "I'm in my element."
Right. Yeah. No, it is a great episode. It really is brilliant Star Trek. So yeah, and for that reason, I think you're right. Well, and getting back, so the shows really are a reflection of their cat. I mean, listen, I would argue that that's, Voyager is lucky in that they have Tom Paris and Harry and the Doctor all providing comedic relief. Yeah. Because both Janeway and Chakotay are, I'm sure they're kind of humorless stiffs. Yeah. Right. And Tuvok. So you got the 3 main people on the bridge are just have no sense of humor.
Yeah.
But you've got the Doctor and Harry and Paris doing stupid shit.
And then when 7 of 9 comes in, they're able to do the fish out of water routine with her for a while.
Right. Yeah. So she kind of plays that kind of Data character.
She plays the role that Teal'c played in Stargate.
Yes, that's a good. I'm binging Stargate right now. I'm on season 8.
I love Stargate. I especially there's one episode I remember where O'Neill says, "What do you think about such and such?" The guy that they've been dealing with, the alien they've been dealing with. "What do you think about such and such?" And he goes, "He is concealing something. What do you think it might be?" "I do not know. He is concealing it."
Yeah, it's funny watching that show again, which is brilliant. And watching that, and of course, we did the auctions for Stargate, so I
Yeah.
got to go up and spend time on the sets and tear everything apart. It was freaking awesome. I love that, and I got to talk to Brad and the producer and all, and John Lennox. But watching it again, especially now that I'm in season 8 because of SG1, where O'Neill gets promoted.
Yeah.
But certainly you get to see the later on is the humor which they allowed. What's his name? Who plays Jack O'Neill? MacGyver.
Richard Dean
Anderson. Yeah, the humor with which he plays it, that character is really good, and but also I'm watching Christopher Judge again and going, God, he really does such a great job with that role, because also he does a great job being funny when he's not trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And that I just watched the episode, which I honestly don't remember having ever seen, which was the one where Teal gets caught in the virtual reality game. And
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's a great episode. It's basically they hook him up to a virtual reality machine. One of the pieces of alien technology that they discovered was this immersive environment, and they change it to be a training simulation.
And they have problems.
And yes, and hijinks ensue. And he gets stuck in it, and it's one of Christopher Judge's best performances.
Yeah,
it really is, because he's fighting this machine, and it's really, really brilliant. And so I have newfound respect, honestly, for all those actors. You look at that show and you go, wow, where'd they find Michael Shanks? Someone who you never heard of before, or Amanda Tapping.
The only one that you'd ever really heard of was Richard Dean Anderson,
right? Because he was MacGyver.
And I first watched him on General Hospital.
Holy shit! Was he on General Hospital?
Yeah, he played one of the Weber brothers. There were 2 Weber doctors.
Okay.
I think if I remember correctly, he killed himself on the show or something.
Oh, okay.
He shot himself and didn't die, and later recovered with absolutely no ill effects from putting a bullet in his head. If I remember, because stuff like that.
I think I'm getting better.
Yeah. So I always thought of him as, when MacGyver first came on, it's like, hey, it's the General Hospital guy.
Yeah, right.
Which, of course, I mean, this all ties together because, of course, General Hospital is the show that Jeannie Francis is on. And Jeannie Francis is, of course, married to Jonathan Frakes.
Right, of course.
So Richard Dean Anderson, I remember reading somewhere that, like, Richard Dean Anderson and Jonathan Frakes are, like, really good friends.
Are they really?
Yeah, because they met through the wife. That's
interesting. That's wow, there's really that's the only Constitution you'll see in Trek.
There is everything at Wolf 359.
Yeah, because you don't see, they have no problem keeping Mirandas around into Deep Space Nine, but you never see Constitutions. Why? Why did you never see Constitution?
I think they built a lot fewer of them, and they wrote them hard and put away wet, and we see a bunch of them destroyed. I don't think that they built very many Constitutions. I think the ship that they built the shit out of, which is why we're still seeing them 100 plus years later, is the Excelsiors.
Yes.
And so they built a metric shit ton of those things.
Not only those, that looks like a sturdy ship too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You look at it and go, wow, that's it. And I remember. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say I did. I think Pat was on. I did one episode where I was talking about how you end up with things like we don't really see very many ambassadors. We only see the one.
Right.
And I hypothesized that, okay, maybe they're all located in some other part, but you end up with these weird things when you build a lot of one thing. Like, we're getting rid of the KC-10 extenders, but we're keeping the KC-135s, the older one. We're
Okay.
getting rid of the B-1s, but we're keeping the B-52s.
Well,
And part of that is
yeah.
the B-52s in particular. The B-52s are built like they're way overbuilt. They're built like tanks because it was sort of a stopgap measure. They didn't go in for a whole lot of finesse. They just built it like a tank. And so that's one of the reasons why the airframes have so much lifespan left on them. But the other issue is we built a shit ton of them. And if you only build a small number of things, you find yourself in a situation where, okay, we have to simplify the fleet. We can either keep all of the more modern things and still have to keep the older ones because we don't have enough of the more modern ones, or we get rid of all the more modern, or we get rid of the more modern ones and we keep the older ones and we simplify our supply chains and our maintenance requirements and the number of program offices we need to have and all that other stuff. And so my hypothesis is one of two things has happened. Either they didn't build enough ambassadors to really make it worth their while to keep them and to like have them turn into an entire tech tree, like you saw with the like the Mirandas being based upon the Connies. They just didn't do that. Or they're all located in one sector of space on the other side of the Federation, and we just never see them as a result.
Well, listen, I think the analogy to bombers is a good one. You don't see any B-58s. You haven't seen B-58s for 50 years, right?
No.
And they came in after the B-52s. So that's a good analogy. And I think the other thing is,
they were insanely expensive to operate.
Yeah, right. And so you're talking about, at the time of the motion picture Star Trek 3, that time frame, you have the Enterprise refit, you have the Miranda, you have the Excelsior. Okay, so we know you have those three classes, and the one that's obviously the Miranda, they turned into everything. It's which is kind of like, it's kind of like a Boeing 707, right? Well, you turn into a KC-135, you turn it into an AWACS plane, you turn it into
and then over time you dial it back from frontline service and you're using it for just puttering around stuff. I mean, that's clearly what they've done with the Excelsiors. It's interesting the number of times an admiral shows up on an Excelsior.
Yeah, that's true.
And it also appears to be the case that they use Excelsiors. And I can't remember if we ever saw this in a canon source or whether this is just people putting two and two together. I don't remember where this comes from, but it appears to be the case that, like Enterprise is the premier ship in its sector. It's going around doing stuff. It doesn't make sense to have Enterprise running back to base to do personnel transfers and stuff like that. So there are occasionally ships. In fact, we see one. TJ could tell me exactly who the captain of it is, because I think he mentioned it, that there's one captain that we see in like 3 different episodes, and he's basically Picard's errand boy. His job is to go back to the starbase and then get stuff and bring it out to Enterprise so that Enterprise doesn't have to go back.
I was just about to make this point, Paul. Paul makes the point, since the NX 2000 was designed as a test bed for transwarp tech, it could be the space frame was way over-engineered. That's exactly the point I was going to make. So great minds think alike. Yes, exactly. This was supposed to be the test bed for transwarp drive. So yes, you would think that it would be over-engineered. It looks like a ship that's over-engineered, right? Look at it size-wise, like structure, and also I love those short little pylons, the way the nacelles are tucked down and tight to the secondary hull. Everything about that ship tells me, and now I also just have to I hated the Enterprise B. I hated it. It's like, oh, you needed to stick all that shit on top of it. As a matter of fact, I told John Eves that once before I realized it was his job to put all that shit on the Enterprise B. And I was like, oh, I hate the way they fucking bastardized it. And he was like, oh, I'm the one that had to design all that. I was like, ooh, I'm sorry, John.
But what did he say? I mean, was he directed to? Or?
He was told, yeah, we need this ship to look different, more advanced, whatever. And while I'm okay with the big impulse engines, that the stuff that was the form of the Excelsior was so graceful, and to stick the shit on the front around the deflector dish just really pissed me off.
Yeah. So this is an interesting theory that maybe the Enterprise C was the only ambassador class. I suspect that it wouldn't be, because then it would be the Enterprise class, if nothing else. I suspect,
but it could have been a small. They could have
been
had
a very small class,
right. It could have been. Was CVN 65 the Enterprise class?
By default, I mean, there was only one. She was a one-off.
Right. I've never heard it referred to, because after that it was the Nimitz class, right?
Yeah.
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 So,
well, but in between you had Constellation, Kitty Hawk, and John F. Kennedy as conventional carriers, and they were approximately the same. But one of the things that you learn is that there are no two ships that are the same, even if they come out of the same shipyard, especially if they come out of different shipyards. So, for instance, my first time at sea on an Arleigh Burke was USS Porter, DDG 78. My second time at sea on a DDG, on an Arleigh Burke, was USS O'Kane, DDG 77. Different shipyards, even though they're right next to each other, but they're the same class. But there was lots of little subtle differences. Like, for instance, the Destroyer Squadron Commodore has a stateroom on board. In case he's on board, they've got a VIP stateroom that is intended to be his stateroom. It is in a passageway that curves around. So it's basically, so you come down a passageway, and the door to his stateroom is directly in front of you. You turn right, you go down about 10 feet or so, and then the hallway turns to the left. And so basically you walk along two sides of that passageway. Well, when I described to you about the door being directly in front, that's aboard Porter. On O'Kane, it's around the corner. The door's in a different place. Like,
interesting.
No idea why. On USS Carl Vinson, CVN 70, if you're going to fly off, there is no lounge for passengers that are waiting for their plane. Right. On the later Nimitzes, on John C. Stennis, CVN 74, CVN 74, there is a lounge, right? It's a dedicated room that's about maybe about the size of my living room or so, maybe a little bit bigger. That'll hold about 30 people in their luggage, kind of tightly. And it's also got the admin office where they like do the roster stuff, and they get your next of kin and all that other information and check you in and stuff like that. But you go to on the older ship, you go down a stairwell and there's a wide landing. That's your area. There's no chairs. There's nothing. You just stand there.
Well, listen, when you're building these ships, when you're building them in parallel, even, nothing's perfectly parallel. You're starting one, then you're starting the next, and then you start. If we just extrapolate this to starships, it's like you're building, NCC 2187 and 2188 and 2189, and on 2187 you start that first, and that one's maybe a month ahead of all the others, and as you're building it, you're going, fuck, we forgot to do this, and you change it on the other two. These connectors are an inch apart, you got to change it back here. And you change roll forward all the corrections.
And that's exactly how you do it in peacetime. In wartime, because they did this in World War II with both ships and airplanes, they had the system down, and they're turning the crank as fast as they can turn the crank. And so you literally would have a situation where the bomber comes off the line, they put in all the oil and stuff, they gas it up, a pilot flies the bomber from where it was made to another factory facility, where they then get out their big saws, etc., and cut holes in the bomber to put in new equipment. because they don't want to stop the production line. They did that with ships too. The ship would come out of the shipyard and go across the bay to a pier over there or something, and then they'd start like ripping shit out that they had literally just installed.
Wow.
And it's because it's way easier if you're turning the crank at maximum speed. It's more efficient to just keep turning the crank as fast as you can than it is to sort of go back and try to fix that stuff.
Wow.
And so the question in my mind is, when your production line consists of 10,000 guys that are like, my job is to turn the screw, that sort of thing, right? How does that change when you're dealing with the construction crews that you would expect to have in Star Trek time, right? Where they could be making change to the computer blueprints in real time.
Right. Oh yeah. Exactly.
And there's probably a lot of stuff that's replicated. And so if you're replicating parts, it's like, oh yeah, we'll just use the new one. So, and just think of the data management problem you've got there, right? Like I can't find the actual blueprints to my ship. Like none of these blueprints are correct. That happens
you're just updating you're updating the plans for your ship, and it's populating through all the shipyards. By the way, one of the most amazing statistics that I've heard, I was talking about building shit, was during World War II, 151 aircraft carriers were built.
Yeah.
151. Now, 122 of them were escort carriers.
Yes.
Big deal. Still, that's 151 aircraft carriers, and they wonder why we won World War II.
I was just listening to something not too long ago on YouTube where the guy made that exact observation.
Interesting.
Greg's Planes and Automobiles, which is a fantastic YouTube channel. He does mostly World War II airplanes. He says automobiles, and he runs his sort of like day job, side job is that he runs a performance racing shop on the side. And then he makes YouTube videos about World War II airplanes, mostly World War II. And he was talking, he made that comment, but it's fantastic. I'm currently on episode 2 of his 7-part series on the P-47 Thunderbolt.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And each one is about an hour long.
Interesting. I was never a fan of the Thunderbolt. And there's such interesting planes like the P-61 Black Widow that you never hear about. Yeah, it's like I can't get enough about that airplane. It's so interesting.
Yeah, the problem is the Black Widow had production delays and came out so late.
Yeah,
that it got to do like 5 combat missions.
It was like the Pershing tank.
Yeah,
the M26 Pershing tank, was that what that was? The Pershing tank was so late into the war that it was
not the Pershing. I think I know the tank you're talking about.
Was that wait?
The Pershing was the one from the beginning of the war, wasn't it?
No. The Pershing M26. Yeah, M26 Pershing. It was in service. 1944 it came to service. That was our first heavy tank.
Okay.
Because before that,
I'm thinking of the Sherman.
Sherman. Yeah, the Sherman was the mainstay of the American tank force. But yes,
Sherman is a very interesting tank. There was something I heard about this not too long ago. Originally, it had a one-piece hull.
Yeah, a cast hull.
Solid cast hull.
It was cast hull, yeah.
And this was one of those ideas that looked great on paper, but the problem was you needed to be able to repair it in the field, and that meant being able to take out a big chunk of armor and replace it with a new armor plate. They had created a tank where basically, if you wanted to fix the hull, you had to like replace the entire hull, or just sort of half-ass it. And they concluded like, yeah, this is a great idea, except it's not maintainable in the field.
Interesting. Yeah, there's some good stuff online about the whole cast hull versus because they did change, and of course it still looked like a Sherman, but
Yeah.
the edges were rounded on the cast ones as opposed, But yeah, that is all the whole development of tank warfare in World War II. That is just another amazing something you could do again, a whole series of videos on. I'm sure people do. Well, thank you, sir. We listen. We appreciate Jim. We appreciate that. Anytime. Thank you very much. Let's see. Dark Skies did an outstanding document. Oh, okay. Dark Skies. I assume that is a YouTube channel.
YouTube channel. So I would caution people about there's Dark Skies, Dark Docks, Dark Seas. He's got a whole slew of channels with the word dark in it. Some of them are very good. I think I add that caveat because the thing is, I've noticed that the closer he is to a subject that's my Jeopardy category, the more problems I see. Like when he talks about Navy stuff, he's just plain wrong.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. He gets and it's oftentimes not major stuff, but like the details are wrong. So every now and then there's some major stuff. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I remember there was something where it's like, dude, you just don't understand how to even look at that incident.
Gotcha.
You just didn't understand what happened in that incident. This is one of the problems I've run into. I've talked with Pat and Andy about this before, is that the more you know about the subject, the harder it is to find stuff on YouTube.
I bet.
But the problem you run into is that, you still want to find stuff, right? And so I'll be like going, it's like, this guy's, oh no, that's wrong. Oh, this guy's wrong too. And that guy's wrong too. So it can be a problem.
Plus Saint Bo, you get bonus points for having Spaceman Spiff as your avatar.
Yes, I think that. Oh, by the way, speaking of which, I found a good game. So my apologies to everyone for not telling you in advance that we weren't going to have a show last week. I knew in advance. I meant to say it the time before when Alec and I were on. I just forgot to say, hey, next week I'm going to be playing games with a friend on Saturday night. Won't be able to do the show. So a friend of mine accepted orders for Yokosuka. He leaves on the 3rd of October. I had already canceled going to DC once to hang out and play games with him, but so I did it last weekend. And we played a game that's been out for a couple of years, but I somehow missed it until relatively recently, a board game called The Captain is Dead. So the premise is you're in the last 10 minutes of your favorite sci-fi show, but this time the captain is dead. And it's a cooperative game where you're trying to, in the end, you have to repair the jump drive, because if you can't jump away, you're going to die. But in the meantime, there are aliens teleporting aboard your ship.
Oh my
There's
God.
occasionally aliens taking shots at you, reducing your shield level. And if your shield level goes, if you ever have no shields when you take a hit, you're destroyed. It's next to impossible. In fact, I don't think you can get killed in the game. You can be injured and have to go to sickbay. You can find yourself in a situation where like the teleporter isn't working, and as a result, it's really hard to get around the ship because there's aliens everywhere. So we played 4 times. You know a game's good when you say, okay, what are we going to play next? And like people go, can't we just play this again?
That's awesome.
It's a good game, and they very clearly were aiming for a Star Trek feel.
Very cool.
One of the characters, there's an admiral. There is a counselor that looks just like Whoopi Goldberg's character. There is an ensign, and the ensign has one skill. He can transfer skills from one person to another with no cost. So basically, he's a messenger, and he's a really good messenger. So if you've got a lot of players in the game, somebody being the ensign is good because he can go around to people and take stuff from one person and give it to somebody else for really cheap. But if I played once with just 2 players, the ensign would have been a horrible person to have for that.
I
Lost.
Totally changing the subject. My
Yes.
good friend Paul Horvath was at the Air Force Museum last week. He posted photos of it, and I'm like, oh, we have got to schedule our trip to the Air Force Museum for all the for Axanar people.
Yes, we got to do that.
I'm looking at the shit they have at that museum, and I'm just like, it's like there's the XB-70, and then there's the lifting bodies, the HL-10,
yep.
and X-24 in front, and then there's the B-58, and I'm like, oh, I gotta go to this museum. I can't get there.
And they've got a B-2 and a B-36 and stuff.
Oh my gosh. And a B-36, another plane I love.
Another thing that's happened since I talked to y'all last. In fact, I think I did it the day after the last show. I went to Columbus to the hotel where Marcon is going to be next Memorial Day, and I looked at their suites. And
what's Marcon?
It's a science fiction convention.
Okay.
In Columbus. David Weber is going to be the guest of honor. Marcon died, and then it was almost immediately somebody did a resurrection spell on it.
Oh yeah, okay, right.
And so basically what my intent is I am going to get a suite that it's their VIP suite. It's got a table, a good sized table. It's got a little kitchen area. It's got a sitting room area. It's reasonably pricey, but my plan is to get this suite, and it'll just be a hangout space. So I'm advertising it as a BU9 meetup. So I'm talking to my BU9 colleagues and trying to get them to come. And I'm going to boost it as a Starfleet Tactical meetup. So anybody who wants to go to Columbus next Memorial Day, my intent is, unless something changes, is to have a space set up that we can just sort of hang out in. And I may conclude in the end that the experiment was a success. I learned never to do this again. But in the meantime, that's what I'm planning on doing.
Awesome. We'll keep us posted. Definitely keep us posted. That is absolutely something we all need to know more about. Well, listen, I've got to get going because I've got 2 foster puppies next door that I've got to go.
You should go take care of the foster puppies. Let me tell everybody quickly what I have planned. So I intend to get back to that long list of naval documents and sort of analyze them and present them again, present my take on them and how they work. In all honesty, it's been long enough since I did it with all the medical stuff that I need to go back and re-listen to a bunch of shows and sort of get back into the gestalt of it all to do that. I have a show planned on torpedo boats and fighters and what the differences are, and how I think those models work in terms of science fiction in general and Star Trek in particular. What I was intending to do tonight, but ended up having this conversation with Alec instead, is taking a look at part of the Renegade Legion universe, the old FOSSA game, which I've talked about in the past in terms of the ship types on all the naming and typing stuff. I've talked about Renegade Legion, but I was going to specifically look at Renegade Legion Prefect, which is their planetary assault game, but it includes like taking over the entire solar system, not just a target planet. And the thing that came with something called the operational briefing, which was like 22 pages long. It had some table of equipment stuff, order of battle stuff in it, but it had this essay on how space combat works in that universe and how to think about space combat. And it goes part way towards something that I've been saying for a while now, which is that in a lot of science fiction, I do not see the specialized vocabulary that I would expect that professionals would develop to have conversations about space combat, right? Because the air guys do that. The air guys in particular do that. They use terms like A-pole and F-pole and E-pole and no escape zone and a bunch of things to describe the kinematics of the situation, right? So professionals don't talk about the range of a missile. They talk about, because the range is based upon your altitude and the speed at which you fire it and stuff like that. They do talk about when you're offensive and when you're defensive and trying to maximize this value while you're minimizing that value. And since they're correlated, you have to shift back and forth. And they've got an entire specialized vocabulary to talk about that. And so Prefect sort of moves in that direction when it talks about things like maneuver spheres, which is the representation of where your ship can go based upon your current vector and the amount of thrust you have to change that. So one of the reasons why I wanted to mention this for everybody is if you go to online and you search for Renegade Legion Prefect Operational Briefing PDF, you can find it. Normally, I wouldn't advocate that people go and do this, but the game's been out of print for 30 years.
Hey,
not quite 30, but at least 20.
So I just want to, yes, the movie is being released. He wait a minute, did Paramount really sue you guys? Yes, back in 2016, where you been?
Yeah.
And this is, tomorrow we're filming the latest blog entry that I did. We're going to do a video of it, which is the 5 big lies about Axanar. And one of the things I say in it is like, we always assume, since we over communicate to fans through our blog, through Twitter, through a YouTube channel, through our live streams, on the Kickstarter Indiegogo. We're always communicating. We assume people know these things, but that doesn't mean people pay attention to them.
And if I can add into this, so you and I haven't talked about the particulars of this, but I know enough about how these things work to know, okay, you get sued. You've got a whole list of people that are signed up to do stuff for you. You get sued and you go down to parade rest for 3 years or whatever it was while you're dealing with the lawsuit. What's the first thing you do when you're done dealing with the lawsuit and you can do it again? You have to go back to everybody who 3 years ago had time to help you and say, hey, are you still in? And my guess is probably about 2/3 of them said, hey, dude, I'm like really busy. I'm kind of doing this other stuff.
Yeah. Now. And we're not in LA anymore. So it's not like people can cut, and so there are great people like Mike Demerit, who's second AD on Enterprise and Voyager. And it's like, I call him for advice, but he can't be our producer, our line producer, because he's in LA and we're out here. So
so you end up with a situation where people think of it as just like, oh, I just put it off for the weekend. It's like, no, the old project ended and now a new project has to be spun up.
Yeah.
And just about the time you get ready to start rocking and rolling again, COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have a director who files a fraudulent fraudulent copyright on your script and saying all that stuff you shot over 3 days in 2019 before COVID, you can't use it because I own the copyright. Which you're like, so I have to sue Paul Jenkins now, because he's being an asshole. Which is not slander, by the way.
From talking with Dave Trowbridge and Sherwood Smith about the Exordium series, it originally was going to be a mini series, and it was like moving towards production. Now, of course, getting anything made in Hollywood requires 15 miracles to occur in sequence. And so I think they were that like the miracle 4, miracle 5 level, right? So it wasn't by any, but there were people that were like going to make this thing, right? That's what the plan was. And then the writer's strike happens. And, all the executives move. The writers, whenever there's a strike in Hollywood, it's musical chairs. And everybody switches organizations. The new people come in and say, I've got no interest whatsoever in the old stuff. And even if they did have interest in it, all of your players have left. And you've got to build it. You're basically, you may not be starting from zero, but you're close to zero.
Yeah, it's absolutely. Yeah. It's been a thing. All right, I do have to get going.
All right.
Everyone, hey, thank you so much for having me on again. Always enjoy being here.
Thank you. It was good.
Thank you, everyone. By the way, I just want to point out to everyone, please go and join our Patreon. We have a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Aries Studios. That's how we support the studio. Tomorrow we have a big volunteer day at the studio. We're shooting some videos. We're getting ready for next month when Josh Irwin is bringing Avalon Universe to Aries Studios, and he's going to be shooting an episode of Avalon Universe there. So please support us. You can give us $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever, and it helps us keep the doors open. And make sure you sign up for the Axanar Newsletter down there, axanar.com. Go to the newsletter link and sign up. Get all the great news about everything that's happening at the studio and with Axanar.
Why don't you go ahead and take off and go take care of the dogs? I just realized I need to talk about calendar stuff real quick.
Go do that. I will get out of here. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
All right. See you later, Alec. Okay. So calendar stuff. Just to let you know, let's see. It's currently the 24th. We had a show tonight. No show next week because I will be at a science fiction convention. One of the things I'm going to be doing at that science fiction convention is talking to some author friends of mine, because I've been planning for a while. This year hasn't been a good year for executing on plans for a bunch of reasons, but I've been planning for a while to start bringing in author friends of mine and doing interviews with people. And so that's the plan. And so I'll be talking to some people. I've already talked to Chuck Gannon. I've already talked to Walter Hunt. There's a few others I want to talk to. So my plan is like once a month, we'll bring an author on who's written about space combat in their science fiction, and we'll have a conversation. So next week, October 1st, no show. The next week, we should have a show. It will be me solo, perhaps with Lissa. I expect Lissa will be there, but not Pat. The week after that, no show, because I will be, wait for it, at a science fiction convention, Icon in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Then the 2 weeks after that, there will be a show, and I think I'm probably going to be solo on those shows too. Pat is currently, he's got like a Naval Reserve thing. He needs to go to Europe, and he's going to be gone. He's dealing with all the headache that goes along with traveling, and then he's going to be gone for 2 weeks. So when you add all that, and then when he gets back, he's got to spend some time with his wife. So the 22nd and the 29th, I expect to have a show, but just me. And then on the 5th of November, I'm going to, wait for it, be at a science fiction convention, Astronomicon in Rochester, New York. And so no show on the 5th of November. And after that, it's unclear, although there's a good chance that I think I'm going to be at a science fiction convention the Saturday after Thanksgiving, but that science fiction convention is actually going to be if I end up going to it, my buddy Andy Presby and his wife Joelle, they're also going to be there. Joelle is a science fiction author. She's one of the people I want to have on the show. And so maybe we'll try doing one from a hotel. I'm not sure I trust the internet connectivity, but we may try that. And so maybe a show on the 26th of November. Expect a show on the 19th and the 12th. And I really need to figure out how to I need to create a Facebook page and be able to put all this stuff up on Facebook so that information is there. And I need to figure out how to do that in YouTube too. So with that, everybody, that's it for the show for this evening. Got plans for not next week, but the week after. And I'm looking forward to doing them. So thank you very much, everybody. And I'll see you later. And now let me find my cursor. I had it up by my calendar. Oh, somewhere there's the outgoing. See you later, everybody.